In many ways, I think it's a real shame that Bernanke is slated to speak at all. I mean, I think that the real problem is we've heard too much from central bankers trying to, and in particular in the Fed's case, you could say manipulate the market for a particular policy goal. I think there's everything to be said for central bankers coming out, as I think perhaps Draghi has done and Carnell more recently, to try and say, look, you've got it wrong in this particular aspect, this is where we're going. But I think with the Fed, it's more a case of, we're not going to do anything for ages and ages and ages and ages. And actually, in the meantime, the economy is looking okay. The labour market data and the inflation data are telling us all we need to know. We don't really need Bernanke on top of this, muddying the waters with his, at times, ham-fisted interventions.
Yeah, the communication strategy has been a little unwieldy, let's put it that way,
yes.
Over the last few
Some
weeks.
would use the word inept. I obviously wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't possibly go down that road, as I'm sure you wouldn't either. The interesting thing is, and Mike brings up the data, Bernanke's got to sort of go with, as you point out in your notes, got to go with the grain of what the data is saying. And I read your notes with interest. Maybe some speculation that what he's trying to do is squeeze out a little bit more monetary stimulus using words and changing the language, but that would go against the grain of what the data is at the moment.
Ultimately, it's a very dangerous thing to do. In the end, if you do that, there comes a point where either the market goes, this is not credible, and whack, you get hit in the face, as happened a couple of weeks ago when they started to make the move, because up until then, all the push had been, and you know what, we might even do more QE. That was how it was going. So the change was a really abrupt one, and that's where we're at today. I think in terms of what he does, he'll stick very much to the Boston speech. It was very, very dovish. He'll make that distinction between QE and the Fed's funds rate, and hopefully that'll be enough. But he just doesn't want to deviate from that dovish path too much. Otherwise, people go, you know what, he's flipping again.
Rob, I'll translate. I think Mike's got a question,
Yeah, Bernanke has a tough job today talking about the economy because job growth's picked up, but GDP has been lower in the United States since they started QE3. So my question would be, do you think QE3 has really made a difference in the U.S. economy or around the world, or is it all market psychology that we're playing with here?
Well, I'm sure psychologists would say that their jobs are, very, very important too, and placebos, can cause miraculous cures. I think QE1 did something. I think it, had some meaningful effects on the dollar. It stoked risk asset prices. QE2 less so. QE3 perhaps barely at all. And if it is doing anything, it is through sentiment. It's through the wealth channels. It's through financial assets. Doing more of it. The expansion of QE3 when they moved up to $85 billion a month. I couldn't even see the point of that because the economy was looking pretty good even back then. So I think there are reasonable arguments that they've been overcooking it for some time and for way too far. So tapering is sensible. It's just, we've got to a point where we were expecting something else. This is the problem. It's communication.
How do you think they will handle communication now? How do you think those that are advising the FOMC will think about this? Do you think we now need to hear from fewer people? Do you now think that'll be what happens? Do you think that as we go into this tapering phase, which is going to be incredibly volatile, because we've now got two-way action in the market in the way that we didn't before, that we'll have fewer speakers? How do you think the Fed is actually going to handle what is probably the most critical element of this phase, how it is actually communicated to the market?
Well, it's a very relevant question, but it's a difficult one because part of the issue is it depends who's doing the communicating. And up until now, you've had lots of people, the regional Fed presidents, for example, have all been talking about QE for months and months, long before this really blew up. But it was when Bernanke hinted that it might become important that it became an issue. Now, who's going to be the Fed chairman as of, in 6 months' time? We don't know. It's important who that is. If it's Janet Yellen, well, she's been in charge of the communication strategy at the Fed. So is that necessarily a great switch? I'm not sure. What we saw recently after the FOMC press conference in June was you had about 6 or 7 Fed speakers slated to try and mop up any mess that came up, and they were very useful in the end. So maybe that's how you do it. You stick the chairman out, and then you have a load of people in the wings to come out and try and clean things up when it goes wrong.